Here we have actually two passages. They're sermons that Jesus preached. We know that he did a lot of sermons. We know he did a lot of teaching and whatnot. But two of his messages are sort of held intact. One is called Sermon on the Mount, which you've heard about because it is a place we learn in Matthew chapter 5 where Jesus walked up a mountain and he had his disciples sit down and he taught them from the mountain. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. And then in Luke chapter 6, some of the same material that he used then is also regarded in this sermon called the Sermon on the Plain, because it says in Luke chapter 6 that Jesus went to a level spot and he spoke these words to his disciples. So we have words from the Sermon on the Mount and words from the Sermon on the Plain. And we're going to look at both of those regarding the issue of money, possessions, and what we do with our treasures. As we're syncing up, as we're putting our understanding next to the main frame of what the Bible has to say about it. So let's look at it. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Before I do this, I want to ask a question. Maybe one of the most important questions I've ever asked you. And I'm speaking now to those people who believe that Jesus is Lord, that you've trusted him for your salvation, that you've looked at your life and realized that you couldn't stand on your own before holy God, so you need the covering of the blood of Christ, and you have appealed to Jesus as your Savior. You have accepted him to your heart. You have reached out to him. If that's happened to you, you've regarded him as Savior. But let me ask you the question, have you regarded him as Lord? In other words, if you could understand that Jesus had something specific to say about your life, would you do it? If you could understand that from the ancient words of these sermons comes an imperative on how we should live, would you do it? Would you regard it as simply guidance to think about, or as a statement of governance to obey? That's the question. Because Jesus is not going to be talking in the clouds about this issue. He's going to be talking very, very specifically. And my question to you is, will you do it? Will you approach these things in a sense of humility and say, Lord, you're not only my Savior, you're my governor. Tell me what to do, and I will do it. So, with that in mind, look at verse 19 of chapter 6. Jesus is very specific. In fact, if you look back in chapter 5 and 6, you see that he's talking about some very specific things that every man and every woman has to deal with. Anger, lust, divorce, oaths, retaliation, love your enemies, giving to the needy, the Lord's Prayer, fasting, and now laying up treasures in heaven. Now look carefully, verse 19. He says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, and verse 20, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Do you get that? Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, but instead lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. That's the command. Will you do it? He says, don't lay your treasures up here, lay them up here. And we're even told why. Because here, when you lay them up on earth, what happens to them? Moths and rust destroy, and thieves break in and steal. And over here, when you lay them up in heaven, moths and rust do not corrupt, and thieves do not break in and steal. So you have a very simple imperative. Do not do this because that happens, and do this because that doesn't happen. It's very simple. This is not rocket science. In fact, as I've studied this passage over the years, actually over 2 decades now, I am absolutely amazed at how Jesus is totally comprehensive with these words that he says. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where what? Where moths and rust and thieves who break in and steal. That is, do not lay up yourselves treasures on earth where forces of nature, which is moths, forces of time, which is rust, and forces of human sin, which is thieves breaking in and stealing. You cannot think of anything that you could hold on to yourself as a treasure on earth that is not at some level subject to those three things. Nothing will last. If you have an idea of clothing or carpet or furniture, give it time, moths will come. If you have a car or a boat or a jet ski or, a house or another house or a third house or whatever, give it time, rust will happen. If you want to hold on to gold and silver and jewels, give it time, thieves will come, even if in the form of inflation. It's just one of those realities. Even if you said, well, I'm not going to invest in these things of the earth, I'm going to invest in me and myself and my body. Look is what is happening to our bodies. Day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, we are getting older. Hello, do you understand that? I remember when I started this church back in 1985, I was 29 years old, and I was so full of myself. I said, we're going to go, and I had all kinds of energy. And then, now I'm 55 years old, and I realized, whoa, if I could only recapture that early energy and deploy it now into this church. I remember when it finally hit me that I was turned the corner on middle age. I was in my 40s. And I went to a doctor because I had a pain right here. It ended up to be tennis elbow. And I said, doctor, it hurts. Every time I carry something, it just hurts. And he pushed his arm here, pushed his fingers here, and ow, that hurts. Ow, that hurts, I kept saying. He said, well, you have TMB disease. What? What's that? Too many birthdays. You're just wearing out. You can't even, and it's so frustrating, isn't it? Honestly, you work and work and work and you lay up treasures on earth and you think they're going to last, but in fact, they don't. I can tell you story after story. I've elected to tell you a story right from this church, an absolutely true story that I tell not to be mean, but to make a powerful point. There's a family in our church years ago. He bought a business and just skyrocketed into the stratosphere. And as his business gained more and more and more, he got more and more money and he built a beautiful home and just the best address in North Dallas. Built another home in Colorado. And went from taking long weekend trips on American Airlines flying coach to every weekend flying up on American Airlines first class, and then on his own jet. Bought a farm out in the North Texas area, had horses. Daughters wanted horses. They got some very nice $6-figure Arabian horses. He had cars. He had a boat. He had jet skis. He had all the things that money could buy. I mean, money was never ending for him. Nice guy, too. He's a good friend, as it turns out. One Saturday evening after the service, he invited Fran and me to go to dinner with he and his wife. So we went to a really nice, very expensive restaurant along the tollway. And I could tell it was a very expensive restaurant because the menu that I got didn't have prices on it. The prices were on his copy of the menu. So I didn't know what I was ordering, but I ordered something I thought I'd like, and Fran did as well, and his wife did, and so did he. And we had a nice time. We talked about anything and everything, just a really nice event. And then it came time for the after-dinner drink selections. I have never once in my life had an after-dinner drink. But they give me this little menu, and there's some things you can buy, some cognac and some brandy and some other things, and then some very high dollar prices next to these things. And he asked me if I want anything. I said, no, I really don't. And Fran, do you want anything? And she said, no. Oh, come on, you need something. No, I don't. I wouldn't know what to order. He said, I'll order you something. And he chose one at the very bottom. Turned out to be some kind of cognac, an inch and a half of cognac for $450. And I knew that, but Fran didn't know that. So the waiter comes by and expertly lays this snifter of cognac in front of Fran, and she tastes it and goes, ooh, no, she puts it down, steps back from it. And the rest of the evening went on, and I'm looking at that cognac thinking, can I get a doggy bag for that? I mean, seriously, I've been thinking, that's a car payment for me right there. An inch and a half of cognac, a car payment for me. They lived this way for a couple of years. Around the turn of the last millennium, the turn of the decade, he makes an investment in his business that required a lot of cash outlay. September 11th happens, and his business goes right upside down. Instead of having assets of millions of dollars, he actually owes millions of dollars, and the bank calls his notes. Same time, there was construction near the business, so people couldn't get there as easily. Who could have foreseen what happened to the economy during those days? And one by one, this family began to divest themselves of everything, and I mean everything, that they owned. Their house in Colorado, the cars in Colorado, the farm, the horses. He called me one time and said, do you know anybody that wants a horse? I can make him a good deal on a horse. Paid $80,000 for it, let it go for $10,000. One by one, he let things go. Carpets in his house, collections of guns and pens, anything, fire sale, everything, just to get cash to come in. I don't know exactly the time frame, but I can't be far off if I tell you that within 3 years of him paying for a $450 swirling glass of cognac, I was in my office handing him Walmart gift coupons to have enough food to put on the table to feed his family. Now, please hear my heart on this. I am not being critical of him. I'm not being in any way critical of people that have wealth and use it and enjoy it. But I can't think of a stronger, more powerful story that would indicate how moths and rust and thieves come into the treasures we lay up here on earth and eat them up. And it's interesting too, moths, rust, thieves, those all happen under cover of darkness. You never see moths work. You never see rust work. You never see thieves break in and steal. It all happens way outside of our control. Things that we cannot even control happen beyond our understanding, beyond our reach, and yet drastically impact us. Who would have thought that terrorists would get a plane, dive them into bank building or World Trade Center, and the whole economy would take a giant step back and this guy would lose everything? Who would have thought that? Jesus would. He said as much. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, because they cannot be depended on. As sure as he spoke that, as sure as this family would vouch today, you cannot depend on anything that is centered around this world's treasures.
We thank you for joining us online. The ministries of Christ Church Plano are made possible by generous contributions from our members and viewers. If you have found this sermon meaningful and would like to make a gift of support, please visit christchurchplano.org/give. Thank you.